before miracles, before crucifixion, before sin, salvation, and judgment. There existed a gospel that did not describe events. It described a condition. A gospel that never intended to convince the masses, but to awaken those who were already listening. This text is known as the Gospel of Truth. It does not begin with genealogy. It does not recount suffering. It does not promise heaven in the future. It speaks of something far more dangerous. It speaks of forgetting, and of what happens when remembrance returns. If you're new here, this is Gnostic Codex. Subscribe, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. The Gospel of Truth was likely written in the 2nd century, associated with the Valentinian Gnostic tradition. But to reduce it to history is to miss its purpose entirely. This is not a book meant to be studied. It is a text meant to be recognized. It reads less like doctrine and more like a voice whispering to something ancient within the reader. Its language is poetic. Its structure is fluid. Its message is unsettling. Because it does not accuse humanity of sin, it accuses humanity of ignorance. In the Gospel of Truth, the fall of the world is not the result of disobedience. It is the result of not knowing. Ignorance is described not as a flaw, but as a condition that spread when consciousness lost awareness of its origin. The text speaks of error, not as evil, but as confusion. Error arises when beings forget where they came from. And in that forgetting, fear is born. Fear, according to the Gospel of Truth, is the true foundation of the world as we experience it. Fear of lack, fear of death, fear of separation. From fear emerges control. From control emerges authority. From authority emerges false structures claiming permanence. The text does not say the world was created evil. It says the world was shaped in ignorance. And ignorance builds fragile realities. The Gospel of Truth introduces a radical idea. Truth is not information. Truth is restoration of awareness. You do not learn truth the way you learn facts. You remember truth the way you remember a name you once knew. This is why the text describes truth as something that already exists, waiting to be uncovered. It was never absent. It was covered. One of the most striking images in the Gospel of Truth is the idea of a nightmare. Humanity is described as dreaming, not because reality is unreal, but because perception is distorted. When someone awakens from a nightmare, the nightmare does not need to be destroyed. It dissolves on its own. The text uses this metaphor deliberately. Salvation is not a battle, it is awakening. In this gospel, Jesus does not come to appease an angry God. He does not negotiate punishment. He does not replace human responsibility with belief. Jesus appears as a revealer, one who reminds, one who calls the forgotten by name. The Gospel of Truth speaks of the name of the Father. But this name is not a word, it is identity. To forget the name is to forget oneself. To remember the name is to return to one's origin. This is not metaphorical poetry. This is metaphysical psychology. The text suggests that suffering persists because beings no longer recognize themselves as emanations of fullness. When you believe you are separate, you act from fear. When you act from fear, you create systems to protect yourself. Those systems become prisons, not because they are enforced, but because they are believed. The Gospel of Truth does not tell you to reject the world. It tells you to see it clearly. It does not condemn form. It reveals its impermanence. It does not demonize matter. It exposes its incompleteness. One of the most unsettling aspects of this gospel is its gentleness. There is no threat, no warning of punishment, no urgency built on terror. Instead, there is a quiet certainty. Ignorance cannot survive exposure. Error collapses when seen. Fear dissolves when understanding returns. This is why the Gospel of Truth was never suitable for institutions. Institutions require obedience. This text produces recognition. It does not ask, "Do you believe?" It asks, "Do you remember?" The Gospel of Truth names the true catastrophe of existence with a word that religion later tried to soften. Ignorance. Not ignorance as lack of education, not ignorance as moral failure, ignorance as forgetting the origin. According to the text, beings did not fall because they chose wrongly. They fell because they no longer knew who they were. And from that single fracture, everything else followed. Ignorance gives birth to error. Error is not evil intent. Error is misperception elevated into structure. When consciousness forgets its source, it begins to improvise explanations for its own existence. These explanations harden into beliefs. Beliefs harden into systems. Systems harden into worlds. The Gospel of Truth describes error as something that came into being because the Father was not known. This is a devastating statement. It means the world as we experience it is not grounded in truth, but in assumption. From error emerges fear. Fear is not described as an emotion alone, but as a cosmic condition. Fear arises when a being believes it is isolated. Separated beings fear loss, fear death, fear emptiness, and fear demands protection. Thus, the world organizes itself around defense. The Gospel of Truth subtly exposes how authority is born, not from wisdom, but from fear-seeking stability. When beings forget their origin, they seek substitutes. They look outward for grounding. They accept structures that promise order, permanence, and identity. Authority arises not because it is true, but because it is comforting. This is why the text does not attack rulers, priests, or systems directly. It attacks the ignorance that makes them possible. Remove ignorance, and authority collapses on its own, not through rebellion, through irrelevance. The Gospel of Truth describes error as something that believes itself powerful. Error acts. Error organizes. Error builds. But it is fundamentally unstable, because it has no root in fullness. It survives only as long as it is unquestioned. One of the most important revelations in the text is this: fear does not come from truth. Fear comes from misunderstanding. When truth is present, fear cannot justify itself. This is why truth is described not as a weapon, but as light. Light does not fight darkness. Darkness dissolves when light appears. The Gospel of Truth uses the image of confusion turning into order when truth is revealed. Not imposed order, organic order, the kind that emerges naturally when perception aligns with reality. This is not political order, not religious order, ontological order. The text speaks of people wandering, searching for what they already possess. They build idols out of concepts. They cling to names, roles, and identities. But none of these satisfy, because they are not the source. They are placeholders. One of the most radical implications of the Gospel of Truth is this: salvation is not rescue from the world. It is liberation from false perception. The world does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be understood. This understanding is not intellectual. The text makes this clear. Knowledge alone does not dissolve ignorance. Recognition does. There is a difference. You can know many things and still be asleep. Awakening occurs when something aligns internally. This is why the Gospel of Truth speaks in paradox and poetry. Linear explanation reinforces the same mental structures that ignorance depends on. Poetry bypasses defense. Symbol bypasses resistance. The text is designed to slip past the guardian of belief. Error fears exposure, not because it will be punished, but because it cannot survive clarity. This is why systems built on fear resist introspection. They redirect attention outward. They keep consciousness busy. Busy minds do not remember. The Gospel of Truth does not instruct the reader to fight error. It reveals something far more unsettling. Error never had real substance. It was sustained by ignorance alone. When ignorance ends, error collapses without resistance. In the Gospel of Truth, the central figure is not presented as a redeemer who intervenes in history. He is presented as something far more unsettling, a revealer, one who does not change reality from the outside, but dissolves illusion from within. Jesus, in this text, does not arrive to fix a broken world. He arrives to expose a misunderstood one. He does not confront sin. He confronts ignorance. He does not carry punishment away. He carries remembrance back. This distinction is everything. The Gospel of Truth portrays Jesus as the embodiment of knowledge made visible, not knowledge as doctrine, but knowledge as presence. His function is not to command belief, but to awaken recognition. Those who hear him do not receive new information. They recognize something they already knew but had forgotten. This is why the text describes his teaching as a calling by name, not a name spoken aloud, but an identity remembered inwardly. To be called is not to be chosen. It is to be recognized. The gospel of truth speaks repeatedly of the name of the Father. This name is not a sound. It is not a title. It is not something that can be written or pronounced. The name is origin awareness. To know the name is to know where you come from. To forget the name is to wander in borrowed identities. According to the text, the greatest loss humanity suffered was not expulsion from a garden. It was the loss of its true name. When beings forgot their origin, they accepted substitutes. Roles replaced essence, labels replaced being, authority replaced truth. And the world stabilized around that mistake. Jesus does not overthrow this world. He reveals its foundation. He shows that the systems built on fear are not ultimate. That identity constructed from separation is incomplete. That authority grounded in ignorance has no true power. The gospel of truth describes his presence as gentle, not confrontational, not violent. Truth does not need force. It only needs to be seen. When truth appears, error retreats without resistance, not because it is defeated, but because it is no longer believed. The text uses the image of lost objects being found. But what is found is not external. It is internal alignment. The moment of recognition feels like relief, not triumph, relief that something false no longer needs to be maintained. This is why the gospel of truth does not inspire fear of judgment. There is no courtroom, no final reckoning. There is only clarity. And clarity dissolves false structures naturally. The text describes how, when ignorance ends, suffering loses its foundation. Not instantly, not magically, but inevitably. Fear cannot survive understanding. Confusion cannot survive recognition. The world does not vanish, its spell does. This is the meaning of resurrection in the gospel of truth. Not the reanimation of a body, but the reawakening of awareness. A being who remembers its origin is said to be raised, not lifted upward, but restored inwardly. Those who awaken do not escape the world. They move through it differently. They no longer mistake roles for reality. They no longer cling to identities built on fear. They participate without being possessed. The gospel of truth does not produce followers. It produces rememberers, people who no longer need intermediaries, people who no longer seek permission to know themselves, people who recognize authority only where truth is present. This is why the text remained dangerous, not because it attacked religion, but because it made religion unnecessary, not because it denied meaning, but because it relocated meaning inward. The final movement of the gospel of truth is silence, not because there is nothing left to say, but because what remains cannot be spoken. When the name is remembered, language falls away. Concepts dissolve. Only presence remains. The text ends not with a command, but with an invitation to rest, to stop striving, to release the effort of becoming something else, and to remember what you were before forgetting began. This is not a message meant to convert. It is meant to resonate. If nothing in you responds, it passes unnoticed. If something in you stirs, it is because recognition has already begun. The gospel of truth does not ask you to believe. It asks you to remember. And remembrance does not belong to the future. It happens now. This is Gnostic Codex.